Now, a British MEP has caused uproar in the European Parliament by insulting the new president of the EU Council, Herman van Rompuy. Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party likened him to a low-grade bank clerk with the charisma of a damp rag. His intervention came after Mr Van Rompuy had made his first appearance before the Parliament since his appointment. Our Europe editor, Gavin Hewitt, has this report.
When Herman van Rompuy was appointed the first president of the European Council, he had little name recognition. Even in Belgium, his home country, some called him the grey mouse. He had a reputation as an effective negotiator, although there were doubts about his skills as a communicator, which were reinforced when he announced Europe's backing for Greece over its debt crisis.
To implement all these measures in a rigorous and determined manner, effectively reduce the budgetary... I have to repeat.
President of Europe.
But until now, no one had gone after him quite like Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party. He launched a tirade of insults against him in the European Parliament.
We were told that when we had a president, we'd see a giant global political figure. The man that would be the political leader for 500 million people. The man that would represent all of us on the world stage. The man whose job was so important that, of course, you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you.
Along the way, Nigel Farage described Belgium as pretty much a non-country.
And I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying, we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
Some MEPs denounced his comments as character assassination.
It's not right that this man should be able to trample over the dignity of this House.
The view was that Nigel Farage's intended audience was British voters and UKIP supporters. There are widespread doubts about whether Mr Van Rompuy is the right choice to give Europe a more effective voice on the world stage. But he's never faced such a verbal attack. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Well, thank you, Nigel Farage, for speaking out in such forthright terms about some of the failings of this appointed President of the EU Council, imposed upon the people of Europe as some sort of political president. We should not accept this imposition. As Nigel says, the British people don't want him, and certainly we Scots don't want him. Herman van Rompuy, a former Belgian minister, is nothing but a lackey of King Albert of Belgium, who people should be told is the great-grandnephew of King Leopold II of Belgium, whose forces committed crimes against humanity in Africa in the King's so-called Congo Free State. Crimes of slavery and genocide against the African tribespeople there, with millions of Africans exterminated at the hands of the King of Belgium's men, as was exposed in the book The Crime of the Congo by my fellow Scot, Arthur Conan Doyle, best known for his Sherlock Holmes stories. So it is elementary, my dear Farage, that one should never trust one of the King of Belgium's men. So if we need a European president, but certainly Rompuy is no use, then let's have a general election of all of the people of Europe to elect our president, and maybe we'll elect someone as good or even better than President Obama, someone who would be worth the salary. I'd like to propose my favourite world leader, Condoleezza Rice, as the candidate for President of the European Union. And since we can happily have Americans working in Europe, then why not elect the best American, Condi Rice, to work here in Europe, some of the time as our European President, and no doubt she can suggest a good Vice President to elect to stand in for her here while she is out of Europe on other important world leadership duties.
I am here in Europe so that we can talk about how America and Europe can use the power of our partnership to advance our ideals worldwide. The agenda of US-EU cooperation is wider than ever and still growing, along with the European Union itself.
In Georgia started a week ago over the breakaway region of South Ossetia. Despite calls to get out, Russian forces remain en masse in and around the town of Gori. There's also a large Russian military contingent in the port of Poti.
After President Saakashvili had signed the agreement, the Russians actually moved their forces closer to the capital, Tbilisi. If they don't pull back tomorrow, a Georgian government official told us, we will consider it a violation of the ceasefire. In Tbilisi today, it seemed as if we had stepped back in time. The American Secretary of State and the Georgian President used harsh words with echoes of the Cold War. President Saakashvili denounced the Russians as cold-blooded killers, barbarians. Georgians, he said, were looking evil directly in the eye, and he vowed they would never surrender.
Now, with the signature of the Georgian President on the ceasefire accord, all Russian troops and any irregular and paramilitary forces that entered with them must leave immediately.
Condoleezza Rice then had a warning for the Russians. Earlier, President Bush had accused them of bullying and intimidation. She implied they were behaving like the old Soviet Union.
This is no longer 1968 and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, when a great power invaded a small neighbor and overthrew its government. The free world will now have to wrestle with the profound implications of this Russian attack on its neighbor for security in the region and beyond. Russian forces are to leave Georgian territory outside the zone of conflict. Now, the President has received some clarifications on what was in the document known as Point 5, which is what temporary measures can be in place until there are international monitors in place.
1968 was a low point in the Cold War, and I asked her whether we were returning to those days.
Secretary of State, do you think there's a new Cold War? You talked about 1968 today.
No, the Cold War is over.
So, not a Cold War, but American-Russian relations are as cool as they've been in almost 20 years.
I'm here in Europe so that we can talk about how America and Europe can use the power of our partnership to advance our ideals worldwide. The agenda of US-EU cooperation is wider than ever and still growing, along with the European Union itself.
Discuss with me, Peter Dow, and other viewers of this video by registering your own username account with the For Freedom forums.